Ladies and gentlemen, with a heavy heart and a solemn mind, I come to you, the voice of the people, to announce the finale of our 5th season of Survivor Analytics. As the biggest Yule head in history, I'm not sure how I feel about the end of Cook Islands. My name's Jack, by the way. With me, as always, the true expert. Say hi, Clyde.
What's up, party people? Jack, why do you not feel celebratory with the Yule win at the end of Cook Islands?
On one hand, I feel very celebratory. Yule had a historic run here on Survivor Analytics. I gave him the most winners, I think, of anybody ever.
I would need to go back and check. It's a tight race between him and Russell Hands.
Here's the thing. I loved Yule's play, and then at the end, looking back, I find myself conflicted. We'll get into it. We'll have to talk about it. We can run through the full episode, but it's a tricky win. And to be honest, while I am conflicted about the end, I think this might be my favorite finale. Now, I'm not saying favorite season, but it might be my favorite finale we've ever covered.
That's an interesting take, because I do think the final tribal council is great. You have the battle between Yule and Ozzy, which is high stakes. I feel like there isn't an obvious winner up until the votes are actually read. The final 5 is kind of predictable this episode. That's definitely the low point. But when I compare it to the other finales that we've covered, I think I might like 46 a little bit more, just because you have the entire Charlie Maria situation and seeing that alliance kind of fall apart at the very end. I really like the finale of Samoa. I think the finale of Samoa is a more shocking ending than the finale of Cook Islands.
Well, I don't think it's a shock, but I think the final 4 and the final tribal of this episode are as poetic and call it equitable as you could get from a Survivor finale, right? Because here's a split in the show, right? Especially in the early seasons, Jeff likes to say it's a simulation of society, right? It's a social experiment. Can people create a society on an island? It's a society where there has to be a winner. That's a crummy thing because it sets up a scenario where somebody has to be a loser. And one would think that if 18 people landed on an island in the real world, they wouldn't actually create a society where somebody loses. They've actually done experiments, right? Do you know the story of The Lord of the Flies, the book?
Oh, yeah.
The premise, right? Boys get trapped on an island, they go wild and hate each other and kill each other, right? They've done experiments. They've tested situations like that in the real world. Psychiatrists, sociologists, they've tested this. In the real world, when a Lord of the Flies-esque situation occurs, people collaborate. There isn't a loser. Everybody can win.
That's really sweet.
It is. And so that's the gap in Survivor, right? But it's a game show. There has to be a winner. But I think Cook Islands, the 4 and final, are the closest you can get on Survivor to everybody being a winner. Everybody got the flowers they deserved, I think, in this. Should Ozzy have won instead of Yule? We'll get into that. But the Sundra at 4, Becky at 3, Ozzy and Yule final. Spoiler alert if you didn't know that.
It's been 18 years since this came out.
And the fact that it comes down to a single vote between the 2 strongest contestants on the cast says a lot, right? I think that's really satisfying. So that's why it's my favorite finale.
And I'll be interested to hear where you rank this season of the 6 that we've covered. We'll do that at the end. But let's start with the opening, where we arrive on Aitutunga Beach, and the storyline is clear. Adam is on the bottom. He is sleeping alone in the shelter. No one wants to hang out with him. And Adam has an interesting quote here. He's not really concerned about his strategic options. He instead says, quote, "I was by myself last night. I had no one to sleep with. Parvati's out of the game. Candace is out of the game. There's no one left for Adam to snuggle up with." And I kind of mentioned this earlier, but I feel like the first 30 minutes of this finale really drags for me, because it's just Adam throwing punches and missing every single time. No one really wants to work with him.
I'll say this. The first interesting thing I have written down is not about Adam. It's Sundra saying that the I-24 have never discussed finals permutations. And I think that's really interesting because it says something about Sundra's position as well as the I-2 mentality all the way to the end.
On the topic of Sundra, I think out of the I-2-4, I find Sundra's strategic play the most frustrating to watch. I think Sundra was the person that was clearly number 4 on that totem pole, where people might say, oh, Becky's a follower. She was riding coattails. But Becky had a number 1 ally in Yule that genuinely wanted to go to the end of the game with her. Sundra never had that. She kind of finessed her way into the I2 group, which is great for her, but she never thought what's going to happen in terms of my reputation in front of the jury or what's going to happen in terms of my rap to the end.
Yeah. So another thing to go back to Adam, right? Because I feel like we can just run through the eulogy of Adam here, right? Ahead of the challenge, the I-2-4 do a group prayer. They're all holding hands and saying like a little like, hey, let's do this. We got one more challenge, right? Or a couple more challenges. We're almost there. Got to be brutal to be Adam here, right? You're looking at a game where all you have to do is win a couple more challenges and you're a shoo-in to win the game because the entire jury effectively was on your tribe, right? There's a ton of people on that jury rooting for you. In every tribal this episode, there's nothing but vitriol shown from some of these cast members towards the I-2-4. So if you're Adam, there's light on the horizon, and all you have to do is beat the greatest physical competitor in the history of Survivor, as far as I'm concerned, and 3 of his best friends who have gone through the fires of hell with him. And so, I mean, just an absolute uphill battle for Adam here.
Yeah. And with that, I'm good to jump into the immunity challenge. The second I saw that this thing was an obstacle course, I knew that Ozzy had it in the bag.
Oh, well, in the tree mail, it even indicates something about it being an obstacle course. And everybody goes, oh, it's Ozzy's. Ozzy's got this. Just to break it down really fast, because we have a lot to get through in this episode. It's a absolutely giant challenge. It is an 8-spoked wheel where the contestants have to run through the hub of this wheel, and it's all ropes course, all obstacle course. And around the spokes of the wheel are different paths with different challenges, slowing you down. Retrieve 8 parcels. Those 8 parcels contain puzzle pieces. You have to complete the most, quote, the most difficult puzzle in 13 seasons, according to Jeff. Yule pulls ahead early. Ozzy comes back. Ozzy and Adam get really close at the puzzle. Adam does get within reach of the win here. Gets to the puzzle. He gets close, but Ozzy wins out at the puzzle. 4th individual immunity for Adam. Or for Ozzy, sorry.
4 out of 5 individual immunity wins at this point for Ozzy. And I feel like many people remember Ozzy as the Dolphin Boy. He's an incredible swimmer, great in physical competitions, but even I underrate his skills in the puzzle side of challenges. When Jeff said, this is the most difficult puzzle in 13 seasons, first I thought, oh wow, like we've come so far now that we're almost at 47. But second I thought, this is Yule and Becky's chance to finally beat this guy. We know they're not going to defeat him in anything that involves, running, swimming, jumping. But if you put an intellectual, cerebral challenge in front of them, maybe they could pull ahead. And even then, Ozzy wins. So,
well, I mean, the hard part is the intellectual portion was at the end of such a massive physical challenge. Yule comes from behind, but he's still in 3rd. If you couldn't catch up at the physical section or keep up at the physical section, you're not going to have the chance to win out in the intellectual section. I got to be honest, I'd be curious to see like a straight up list of each challenge this season broken down by like primary attribute tested, because this is a very physical season. And I don't think we've seen a memory or intellectual focused challenge.
The only one that I can remember is it was the only challenge that Ozzy lost. Adam won it, and it involved remembering logistics from previous challenges in the season. But Ozzy's your winner. We can go post-immunity challenge. Adam is clearly on the bottom. They're planning on voting him out. But we actually get to see some strategic play from Adam. And this made me think way higher of him as a player than I did before the finale. Before this week, I saw Adam as your classic Survivor meat boy. He's there to win challenges, but he actually makes some solid pitches here. He knows he's going to go home this week, and he tells Sundra and Ozzy that they can vote for Yul, flush the idol, then Yul and Becky will vote for Adam, and Adam will go home anyway. It's the same outcome, but at least that way Yul is vulnerable at the next tribal council. And I want to ask you, we later see Sundra and Ozzy turn down this offer. Why do they pass up the opportunity?
I mean, we hear this at the Final Four, after the Final Four challenge. They are determined to go to the end as a team, and I think this is a symptom of early era Survivor. It's loyalty to the very end, which is, I genuinely think, an admirable trait, except in the game of Survivor, right? This is where we branch from the utopia to the reality.
Is this loyalty to Yul or loyalty to I2 in general?
It's loyalty to I2 in general. None of them want to be the one to crack the egg. I'll say this, if Sundra had managed to work with Adam, pull off this move, and win that Final Four challenge, there's a world where she gets some votes, right?
So if she pulls off this move, Adam goes home, wins the challenge, votes out Ozzy, I don't think she gets the votes over Yul still. But she gets some votes. She gets more than Becky.
Well, it's not hard to get more than Becky, but...
okay, I will be defending Becky later. I will not take the Becky slander.
I'm not slandering Becky. I'm just saying it's not hard to get more votes than 0.
Okay.
That's all I'm saying. I'm just saying mathematically, I think they just don't want to rock the boat. They want to get it to the end. I think they are also probably thinking still about, they've got 2 challenges left. They think they're in the old era. Spoiler alert, folks. Clyde wasted your time and mine last week, making us do the permutations for a final 2 tribal council, final tribal, when, guess what? This is the first final 3 final tribal council in history. We'll come back to that little trickery, Clyde, but maybe that's part of it too, is if you're Ozzy and Sundra right now, you think you still have 2 challenges ahead of you, not 1. And you have 2 tribals ahead of you where you could be sent home.
I think another factor that keeps the I2s together is the theme of the season. I think they started with that race-based twist, and I think that's something that brought that group together to have all people of color in the Final Four. I think for Ozzy specifically, there's a strong moral component to this vote where we see this at the Final 5 and especially the Final 4. Ozzy thinks it's like amoral to flip against his own before voting out the railroad players. I think that's a line that he's just unwilling to cross.
Yeah.
Sundra, I have no clue what her thought process is. Maybe she has the same philosophy as Ozzy. Maybe she thinks Yul will give her the idol at Final 4. Or maybe she thinks she can beat Ozzy in a challenge and that she's secretly holding back her physical prowess on the season. But with all that, I'm set to head to Tribal Council if you are.
I mean, there's one thing to talk about at this tribal in my book, and it's that Nate walks in on a crutch and it's not addressed whatsoever. Do you know what happened to him?
I should have looked it up, but I have a theory. My theory is that Nate had a little too much fun at Ponderosa. You might remember when he got voted out at Final 9, I said that even though Nate is not technically the mayor of Ponderosa, I think he's the one popping bottles, leading the party on that front. And maybe that's related to him walking in on crutches. But did you find anything?
On Reddit, during the pandemic, somebody asked what happened to Nate's leg, and nothing of value. He did one of those quarantine interviews, and there's something about fire ants. Oh, well, this is crazy. So the fire ant story, Ozzy and Nate were hunting for bananas. As he was knocking the bananas down, some fire ants came down. One fell in my eye and ate through my contact.
Oh,
he had contacts in during the game.
Still, that could have been so much worse if he didn't have the contact on.
But yeah, no insights there. So that's literally all I care about at this tribal, because Adam's trying to egg people on, doesn't really work, and he gets voted off. Anything else?
Adam has some keen insights here. I think he calls out the I2-4 and kind of explains the jury's perceptions of the I2s. Ozzy is the challenge beast. He's the one that wins immunity and enables them to pick off their raros. Yul is the mastermind. He's the puppeteer pulling the strings behind the actual votes. And the other women don't do too much. according to Adam. And you would think Sandra and Becky would hear that and take that as a sign as, oh, I need to step up and make a name for myself. But they don't do it. Jeff straight up tells Becky at one point that if she doesn't take the shot at Yul now, it will likely be either herself or Sandra going home in the next round. Like, even Jeff is egging on these women to finally flip against Yul, but they remain loyal. Your final vote is 4 on Adam, 1 on Yul.
Yeah, I mean, Jeff is literally saying, please give us something. You made it to the end, and we have several characters on the jury who are bigger fan favorites at the end than you. He's like, please give us a reason for you to, be in the promos.
With Adam going home, do you think he returns to Survivor?
I do, actually.
He does not. This is his one appearance on Survivor. And to be honest, I don't know if I really wanted to see an Adam return. I feel like there's so many people in a similar archetype that are more compelling characters.
So who do we have that comes back so far that we've established? Parvati, Jonathan,
and Candace.
Oh, Candace, right. So there's 2 left.
Yeah. I wonder who the last 2 could be. Sandra and Becky.
I would love to have Becky back, I'll say that. Sandra, I wish I could say, well, after this next challenge. All right, well, and now we've got some garbage to get through. They get up on day 38, tree mail, their final challenge. And they go, what? Our final challenge? And Yul goes, wait a minute, don't we have 2 challenges left? And then we do the torch walk.
Well, do you want to talk about the final 3 now? I feel like this is a good time to hit on it.
Okay, so this is the first final 3 in Survivor history. Am I correct?
Yes.
Why did this have to be a surprise to me?
It needed to be a surprise to you so you could feel the same way that Survivor fans felt in 2006. I think, and we'll talk about this more later, but I think there's a legitimate argument that Ozzy was robbed this season through the final 3 twist. But just starting at the surface, do you have a preference between final 3s and final 2s, even though we haven't covered a season yet with the final 2?
So I think I'll need to see a final 2 before I can have a preference because I just can't visualize it, right? All of my mental math in Survivor is about a final 3.
Based on my understanding of the show, I think that a final 2 works well in old school Survivor because in older school seasons, people are more loyal. So you're more likely to take your number 1 ally to the end where it's a real competitive battle between the 2 of them in the final tribal council.
Yeah.
In modern Survivor, every final 3 has a 0 vote finalist. And I think if we changed it to a final 2...
Is that true?
Just about every season does. I think the last time that Survivor had a season without a 0 vote finalist was... It's been a while. I think it's been since season 35. It's been over 10 seasons. So if you change that format to a final 2, the final 3 immunity challenge becomes so important because you'll have the 2 contenders essentially competing to bring that third person to the end.
Well, maybe the argument there, right, is that you don't want to have some fluke in that challenge and then say, well, like, what would you rather have, a no-vote finalist or a landslide final? Would you rather a close vote with a no-vote finalist or a landslide because the no-vote finalist is in the end?
Yeah, and I'd rather have the close vote. I think it adds more drama to the actual season. But in terms of the impact of the final 3 on Cook Islands, I said this earlier, but Ozzy potentially was robbed of a win here. If this season operates as a final 2, who do you think wins the immunity challenge at final 3? Is it Yul, Ozzy, or Becky? I'd put my money on Ozzy.
I mean, it would depend on what the challenge is, right? And they could say, we've just had a bunch of physical challenges. Why would we do another one that sets up Ozzy, right?
Yeah, it definitely depends on the challenge, but given the history of the season, the numbers are definitely in Ozzy's favor that he wins that final 3. And then the question becomes, would Ozzy take Becky or Yul to the end? And that's where I'm kind of stumped. Because I get the sense that Ozzy is a true competitor. He's someone that wants to compete against the best of the best. At Final Tribal later on, he criticizes Becky for not knowing how to make fire. I think there's a world where Ozzy looks at someone like Becky and says, you don't deserve to sit at the end. And he takes Yul and loses. But if he does elect to take Becky, he wins the season.
Well, and I think if he takes Yul, he wins.
Really?
Because it's not Yul earning the end. It's Ozzy taking him to the end. And I think that would be enough especially for some of these Raro jury members, I think that could tip the scales, right?
Yeah, and I guess it's another challenge winning Ozzy's belt too that he can flash in front of the jury.
And what a baller, confident move as a competitor to say, I want to face my biggest competition at the end and say to the jury, I want you to choose between me and the other guy who deserved to sit here, not me and somebody I carried to the end.
That's admirable, but I think it's horrible gameplay, right? Like, the obvious decision there is to take Becky.
It could be, right? But it's such a bad move. It's such a ballsy move that it could be a great move. And there's a lot of people on that jury who would admire that, I think.
Maybe. I don't see that working out well for Ozzy. I think even if he takes Yul to the end, he loses. But I still think it adds to the overall drama of the season to force the I2s to flip on each other without a fire-making challenge. Because this group dominated the season all the way through, and we never actually get to see them go for each other's throats. They determined to blow up in an equitable way, which I don't know if it's even really that equitable. Let's run through rites of passage real quick. Any highlights for you?
There's one moment that is a highlight, and it's only a highlight because I know what happened since. And it's Jonathan, and his little quote says, I feel fantastic, like the guy my wife married. Right?
Yeah.
Knowing the context, that's really sweet. Everything else about this, I think, is dumb. The fact that they carry the torches, so they're carrying 4 torches each, and then they don't light the torches, they burn them. Dumb. But what stood out for you?
I have 2 highlights. One of them is Candace, where she spends half of her reflection segment talking about Adam.
Yep.
We get a slow motion shot of their makeout session, which I didn't want to see again.
Yep. I think every shot of Candace was a shot of her and Adam.
We also have Billy Garcia. I wrote down his entire quote because we need to include our weekly Billy content. Here it is. Quote, I rediscovered that I'm a dream chaser and not some player. That's what I'll take away from this. The new discovered fondness for being who I am. That heavy metal, headbanging, rock and roll rebel. I love Billy. I wish Billy came back. One of my favorite characters for the season. But you trashed on Rites of Passage a bit. I dislike it because it just feels lazy.
Yeah.
If they did the Rites of Passage and they showed you clips and footage that didn't make it into the previous episodes, then I think it's actually compelling. But they run the exact same footage that they showed earlier in the season.
Yeah.
And it just feels like they're filling airtime at this point. I typically just use Rites of Passage as a way to quiz myself on the boot order to see if I can predict which torch is coming next. It's the only way that I can get through it, because other than that, it's pretty dry.
Yeah, that's fair.
You ready to go to immunity? Final immunity?
Yeah. So we've got our last challenge of the season here. Each contestant is on a steel perch measured to the dimensions of their feet. They are out over some water. There are several pieces to that platform. Every 15 minutes, it will shrink. They will remove one of the sections. And the final section, Jeff says, will be half the size of a postcard, something like that, right? And surprise, there will be a 3-person tribal. So whoever loses here could go to the end. But surprise, Yul is still immune all the way to the end.
Yeah.
Which we'll come back to that. Jeff is sitting on a platform under an umbrella with sunglasses on, all the sun protection you could ask for. He's kind of a diva in this moment. Like, he feels like a little emperor on his chaise lounge, right? It's like, oh, dance for me, peasants. Everybody makes it 30 minutes in, 45 minutes in. At the release at 45 minutes, Becky falls. So Becky's out first. Yul gets asked a question at nearly 2 hours. Jeff asks him a question, and he answers it and then falls into the water. 2 hours, Sundra's looking good. 2.5 hours, Sundra drops. Ozzy and Sundra were up there for almost 2 hours on the smallest platform.
Yeah. And there's a couple moments where it looks like Ozzy's going to fall. Most of the players take the same approach, just standing on the perch. Yul is the only one that goes with the squatter's approach, and it doesn't work out too well for him. But Ozzy wins the challenge, and Jack, you hit on this earlier, but you just witnessed the greatest physical performance in the history of Survivor.
Really?
With this win, Ozzy ties the record for most immunity wins in a single season. No one has won more than 5 immunities. So that's something to keep in mind when we watch other seasons. You'll know that there's a cap, right?
I have seen the gold standard.
It's not only the gold standard, but he does it in the fewest opportunities. He goes 5 out of 6 on this season.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
There's 6 people in Survivor to win 5 immunity challenges, and of those 6, he has the highest win rate. I think Ozzy's the best challenge competitor in the history of the show, and down the line, I'll be making a top 10 list on TikTok showing the 10 best physical performances, and it wasn't really a question. Ozzy's number 1 overall. It doesn't get better than this. And I think if I showed this to 2022 Jack, he would be way more pro Ozzy than the 2024 version.
Well, I'm not anti-Ozzy. I guess I'm just tempered a little bit with age. I can't believe I've been doing this show since 2022, but I mean, I guess we're coming up on 2 years here. That's an existential crisis for off the air. Well, so let's talk about the post-challenge, pre-final vote. There's not great terminology for this, right? This is the last tribal council, but at final tribal, the jury makes the decision, right?
It's like the penultimate tribal council, right?
So look at going into the penultimate. It's essentially the men discussing which of the women will go home, which, given the edits on the season, is par for the course. The men control the women because the women haven't been given space to shine, or taken space to shine, to be honest, because we just haven't gotten much from them. And it's hard to say, right? Is that the fault of the edit or the player or both? Part of it's probably the edit, but not all of it, right? Like the fact that Sundra has no primary ally is what it is. Yul expresses, obviously, a preference for Becky. Ozzy says, I don't want to make the choice. Let's send it to a tie break. How do you feel about the let's leave this up to them decision from Ozzy?
I'm kind of a bit different on it because I don't think it makes a big difference either way. I don't think Sundra or Becky were getting any jury votes in a final 3, regardless of the outcome. Like, we're going to talk about the disastrous fire-making challenge between the two of them.
Oh, yeah.
But even if one of them made the fire in 2 minutes or less, I don't think it was really changing their fate in the game.
No.
My real issue with this entire situation before Tribal Council is the dynamic between Yul and Becky, where Yul offers to give her the immunity idol, the most powerful idol, not only this season, but in the entire history of the show. It's a free pass to the final Tribal Council.
What's wrong with that?
If Yul gives Becky the idol, he's leaving himself vulnerable. I think it shows a lack of a killer instinct that he was willing to give it to Becky there and potentially go home at Final 4.
See, I like the integrity of that move. I mean, here's the tough part, right? This move wouldn't work. In the best case, right? Becky has the idol. She is able to play it. Sundra goes home. Becky and Yul make it to the final sitting next to each other because Yul gave up his idol. That gets Becky to the end, gives Yul a little piece left in his resume, and devalues right at the end this whole I too strong, never compromise, never break up mentality, right? I don't see this jury taking that well at all. We see in the final tribal, so many people come at Yul for being a political player, for being a jury pleaser, trying to just sort of handshake his way to the end. And I think if he had talked Becky into doing this, right, it would have contributed to that impression. And I think if it had flipped one person, right, if it had turned one person off of Yul, the outcome of the game is very different. So
how do you see the perception of Becky then if she receives the idol to go to the end?
The perception of Becky doesn't change because the perception of Becky that everybody has is that she is Yul's backup, right? She is Yul's deputy. And Yul giving up his idol to carry her to the end doesn't change that at all. It strengthens it, if anything.
Because I completely disagree with Yul's decision to even offer the idol in the first place, but I think Becky actually makes the right move in saying, no, I can't accept this. I need to do something on my own to build my own resume in front of the jury. That ends up being a disaster too, but at least Becky seemed self-aware enough to realize that I need to distinguish myself from Yul some way at the very end.
You gonna go to tribal?
Yeah, let's go to tribal.
All right. I don't have anything written down before the vote because it didn't seem to matter too much. I did not get the sense that the jury was enthusiastic about this going to a tiebreak and nobody taking a swing. This is Goliath on the jury wanting to see David break up, and they don't get it. And this is the last chance for it, right? Really.
Yeah.
And so it pisses them off. But you know what? I think it's kind of nice. I mean, it's kind of nonsense, right? But it's a game show. At the end of the day, I kind of like this bucking of the expectation for the game, right? And saying, you know what?
I guess.
We're going to play it as a team.
I would rather see them turn on each other. It
Of course
reminds me
you
a
would.
bit. It reminds me a bit of Survivor 44, where the Tika 3 ride together the entire season, and then at the very end, you never get to see them actually flip on each other. Instead, you have Heidi beating Carson in firemaking, which is still entertaining, but it's not the same as watching Carson face off with Jam Jam or Carolyn.
You're right. Right.
I think we never got to see the I-24 really, go for the jugular at the very end.
Yeah, that's true. That's completely true. So it's a tie, 2-2. Becky does not have the idol. So we're going to go to fire making. And it takes an absurd amount of time.
Yeah.
And they both spend 45 minutes just hitting their flint and steel together before anything happens. They get a little bit of fire and it dies out. We get to an hour. Jeff is furious. We get reaction shots from everybody around them. There are members of the jury just fatigued. Ozzy and Yul have their heads in their hands.
Brad is sleeping on the jury.
Brad is sleeping. Jeff is furious. He's furious. Like the reaction shots from Jeff, you don't see him that angry except in like cases of violence and challenges that are a little bit egregious. Jeff gives them matches. Another 30 minutes go by. Both of them dismantle their structures and start just trying to light a fire and then build around that. Sandra runs out of matches. They each get 2 full matchbooks, and she runs out of matches.
Yeah, it's bad.
And eventually she watches, thank God Becky didn't need more matches than 2 full books to build this fire. She finally wins. Sandra is eliminated. And then the most fraudulent the tribe has spoken in Survivor history, because the tribe did not speak. I don't think Jeff should say the tribe has spoken at fire making regardless, but when it took 90 plus minutes and it became essentially a resource management game, not a fire making game, right? The tribe didn't speak here, but that's a soapbox to die on another day.
I really wonder what they would have done if Becky ran out of matches. Maybe at that point, Jeff just says, let's run a game of rock, paper, scissors, leave it up to chance, and we'll just send one of you home right now.
Yeah.
My big issue with this entire segment is that it seems like neither Becky nor Sandra took the time to prepare for fire making before going to tribal council.
No.
They seem to know that the vote was going to be a 2-2 split,
Yep.
and I would understand them not practicing if there was not a precedent for this. But there is.
I was about to ask you if there was. Okay.
Season 10 Survivor Palau is the first season that includes a fire-making challenge. 2 players have a tied vote. They do the fire-making. 1 player wins and moves on to the merge. Sandra and Becky, I guess, haven't seen the show.
Maybe not.
Maybe not. That kind of tracks with a lot of their gameplay for the season. But
Yeah, it does. It does.
Or even Yul or Ozzy. If one of them knew that the tiebreaker was a fire-making challenge, they could have advised their particular party and trained them ahead of time. Instead, we get this segment. I still think it's one of the best fire-making challenges in the history of the show because it is just beyond ridiculous. I'll remember this way more than Jake and Katura in 45, who were in a similar spot where either one would go to the end and get 0 jury votes. But at least this one, there was some fireworks without the fire itself.
I mean, it was very entertaining. That is for sure. And so that's it. We've got our final three. And yeah, good stuff.
We have our final three, and we can talk about the immunity idol here because Yule reaches the final three because you are unable to vote for him in every other round on the season.
Yeah.
How do you feel about Yule in the idol, given that you are a Yule head?
Seeing in the finale, and I guess I had forgotten the parameters of his idol, I expected his idol to stop working after Adam went home. That was the mindset I was in. I guess that was a misconception on my part. I keep going back and forth. I watched the episode yesterday, and I've been thinking about it a lot since, right? Because there's two sides of this coin. The face, the head of the coin is Yule was handed an asset, right? It wasn't a particularly hard puzzle. Yule got this asset really early on that was so powerful, it was a nuclear deterrent that carried him the entire season, right? That's option one, right? Is that Yule got this magical item, took a magic carpet ride from week 2 to week 15.
Yep.
The flip side of that coin is Yule still played a game. Yule took that tool and played a game with enough deftness and enough care that nobody ever tried to flush it. Nobody said, this is the time, we got to get Yule, right? Let's vote for him this week, make him play it, and take him out next week. And so that's what I keep going back and forth on is, was having the nuclear option all the way to the end all that Yule did, or was it the way he used it, right?
It's both, probably, right? It's a combination.
Yeah, it's like 60-40, and I'm not sure which one is the 60, right? It's not 50-50.
Yeah, because it's not clear why they didn't flip on him. Did they not flip on Yule because he was such an incredible person and they felt bonded to him, they didn't want to write his name down? Or was it just the logistics of why vote against Yule? It's going to bounce off of him anyway. I'll be talking about my evaluation of Yule as a player at the end of the podcast, but I think if you're going to fault Yule for one thing, it's that he might play a bit too aggressively. I think from the final 8 of this season onwards, people describe him as the puppet master. He's the mob boss. He's the godfather. And it's easy to operate in that role when you have a shield in front of you that scares the rest of the cast. I think
there's a flip side on that, right? He scared the cast, but never scared them enough for them to flip on him, right? That's good mob bossing, right? Because it's not tyranny to the point of rebellion. It's just ruling with an iron fist.
But I think you'll look at other people in Survivor history because Yule's an all-time great. He's in my top 20 players of all time. But there's other people in the history of the show that take the same approach and they don't rely on some external factor to carry them that far in the game. Some people can just be a mob boss and direct the course of voting based on their relationships. And I think that's more powerful than relying on a random group of people sending you to exile in episode 2 and finding the idol. Like, that's completely outside his own control.
Oh, for sure. For sure. I totally agree with that. Who went to exile first? Was it Adam or Jonathan?
It was Jonathan because he stole the chickens in the premiere.
Yes. So I bet Jonathan, watching the show back and seeing, frankly, how obvious that idol was, must have just been kicking himself because, it got him to the end. But
I'm good to go to Final Tribal. I don't really have a lot to note in that beach segment beforehand with the feast.
The feast arrives, and Becky is so far away that they're yelling and screaming for her to come join them. And Ozzy literally says in a confessional, it's very appropriate that Becky missed the start of the final feast because she doesn't, Yule and Ozzy earned the end far more than she did, right? They are finalists, final caliber players, and she is not. But let's go to the end.
Ozzy walks into Final Tribal wearing the immunity necklace, which I really like. I think it's a visual sign of his challenge dominance throughout the season. But what were you going to say?
Well, I was going to say, do you want to go over like their initial arguments? Because like, here's my thing with final tribal councils. I think the speeches from the jury are a total crapshoot. There's a lot of people who are just getting out their grievances because it's their last chance to speak on national TV. I think it's a little bit more interesting to see how each player characterizes their own game. And so I've got notes on that if you...
Yeah, let's talk about each of their approaches. Who do you want to start with? Potentially Becky?
Let's do a little Oreo where Becky's in the middle as the useless cream. But
what? That's the best part of the Oreo. But
it
okay.
is. That's not a good comparison. A little, I don't know.
We'll make it a Becky sandwich. Becky will be in the middle.
So let's go Yul. Let's just go in order. Yul talks about how he was a team player, how he was really loyal to his tribe, and how he did his best, even in a game of deception, to play with integrity. Those are kind of the pillars of his argument, were working with his original alliances and being loyal and having integrity with them, and secondarily with other people as much as possible, right? Obviously a tricky tightrope to walk there, to say, look, I tried to be honest. Yes, I had to lie sometimes, but I tried. That's kind of the heart of his argument.
But it's an approach that I think resonates well with this particular jury, where this jury is very loyalty-minded. They see flipping like Jonathan as amoral. And Yul played the game strategically, and he takes ownership of that, but he still frames it in the context of loyalty, where the people that he made his pact with, being the I-2-4, he stuck with through the very end.
Yeah.
So I thought Yul had a solid final tribal performance, but I actually think Ozzy might have done a better job.
So let's work our way through, right? Becky's argument for herself is essentially that she was a strong social player. And that's basically it. She says, I was really reliant on my social game, and my relationships got me to the end. True, but not enough. That's it. I have multiple lines like for bullet points of her argument, and then it's just social player.
Yeah.
There's nothing else.
It's a real shame because I think Becky had the second most agency in directing the vote for the entire season. Yul was the primary strategist of that partnership, but Becky still had a lot of say. And I touched on this earlier in the season, but I think Becky's big mistake throughout the post-merge was allowing Yul to stand in the spotlight and take credit for all of their various moves. He flashes the idol during the auction and gets verification from Parvati in the hot tub.
Yep.
He goes to tribal council and says, I was the one that flipped Jonathan, which gave us the numbers.
Yep.
And Becky's just along for the ride, even though Becky was there with Yul where they decided we're going to get Jonathan to flip over. No one really sees it that way because Yul was the one out in front taking credit for every move.
Yeah, I mean, it literally takes until Nate's speech where he characterizes Yul as a big gangsta boss and says Ozzy has a warrior kind of style, and then says, Becky, like, why do you deserve to be here? That's what it takes for Becky to say, look, Yul wasn't a godfather. These decisions were shared. And the biggest risk I took in the game was saying no to the idol, right? She reveals those couple things, but it takes somebody else's speech to get that out of her. She does not offer that freely in her own speech, which I think is a missed opportunity. Would that help her win? Would it be enough? Maybe not. If you have arrows left in your quiver, you might as well use them, right? And she doesn't until the last possible opportunity.
And I think there's a legitimate argument there that Becky has a lot more winning stock on this season if she's not sitting next to Yul. If it was Becky, Sundra, Ozzy in the final three, Yul is on the jury.
Campaigning for her, yeah.
Yeah, we made all these decisions together. Then Becky becomes, the mob boss, what did Nate say?
The big gangsta boss.
Yeah, Becky becomes the big gangsta boss.
Yeah.
And it's an entirely different season, but she never fully separated herself.
So Ozzy's speech essentially summarizes exactly what we've been saying about him all along. He's the provider. He's a physical player. He's an underdog, which he emphasizes because he's, I believe, the only player left from the Latino tribe to make it to the merge.
Yep, there is not a single member of the original I2 tribe on the jury.
Yeah.
Every other player went home in the pre-merge, which granted, maybe that wouldn't have happened if you didn't cut your numbers and get rid of Billy in episode 2, but I'll get over it.
Yeah, I mean, there's mistakes in there that nobody else knows about because he's the only one who made it to the merge, right? Like, there are mistakes in his early game that we don't even have to worry about. But that's basically his argument. So looking at the jury speeches, were there ones that really stood out to you that were like essential or pivotal moments?
I would say the two biggest for me, well, I guess there's a couple big ones. One of the big ones is Brad that asks Ozzy about the most challenging experience in his life. And we get a really human moment from Ozzy. All season, he's kind of portrayed as the dolphin boy, the fisherman, and we learned something about his home life on how he doesn't have a very close or potentially non-existent relationship with his father. Really opens up to Brad and the jury in that moment. And after making Ozzy open up about his biggest insecurity, Brad proceeds to vote for Yul in the end. Did you know that?
I didn't see the breakdown of the votes. I missed that.
But still, that was like an element almost of new era Survivor that I kind of didn't realize that I missed until Ozzy opened up about it. It made them feel less like just characters on a TV show.
I mean, it was a very real and human moment. And to be honest, I feel like when Brad asked the question, because it was like, what's the hardest experience you've ever had? Ozzy doesn't say, oh, fishing 20 fish a day to feed all you white losers on the jury who didn't contribute at all to our food supply, right? He doesn't say starving for 40 days. He gets very raw and real. I think everybody's a little caught off guard, and it's a nice moment. So yeah, that was nice. I agree.
What was the highlight for you?
Somebody said the difference between Yul and Ozzy, right, is essentially physicality versus strategy, right? Ozzy was relying on individual performance. Yul was relying on tribal performance to a certain extent. But then they both emphasize that for each of them, and I think this is really incredible, especially for 2007, you don't see strong people that look like them on national television, especially back then. That's obviously changed a lot, although, perhaps not enough in the ensuing decades. But Yul talks about how if you saw like a group of minority people on TV, it was a caricature, right? They weren't leading men. Ozzy goes on a long rambling thing about changing the perception of Mexicans that is a little bit less articulate, but has the same heart as Yul's, which given their backgrounds kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
Ozzy comes at it from the surfer bro vibe, and Yul says, look, it's kind of has a corporate LinkedIn based statement. It's pretty fantastic that, and this is another reason I think this is my favorite finale we've covered, in the most controversial season, in the season that starts with segregation, literally, it ends with the final 4 being 4 people of color, the final 2 being 2 men of color, and it coming down to a single vote between them. That's pretty spectacular, right?
Yeah. We definitely would not be getting questions about representation if the railroads took control at the merge.
Oh my God. I mean, like there's an alternate world where we're looking at an Adam Candace Parvati final 3, right?
Yeah.
A very real world. I mean, there's an argument too that either Survivor is very different or Survivor is non-existent if that had happened, right? Like,
yeah.
What do the headlines look like if after Cook Islands, it was a final vote of like, oh, which white person out of the 5 out of 20 got the $1 million? Like, hey, we tried to do diversity one time and it backfired, would have been a horrible outcome.
I have 2 other jury spiels I want to hit on. One of them is Adam.
I was just looking at Adam, yeah.
He asks Ozzy why Yul and Becky should not win the game. And I think Ozzy has a great final tribal council performance, especially when you consider the fact that he is the surfer bro going up against 2 lawyers in the end.
Yes.
He's just not in his element here, but he holds his own.
Yeah.
And this is one of the few instances where I feel like Ozzy messes up, where his argument against Yul is that Yul didn't work as hard as he could. Becky rode coattails. We don't need to talk about Becky that much.
Yep.
But Yul didn't contribute to camp life as much as he could have. I don't think that's really the approach that you can go for with Yul. I think the argument that Ozzy should have made against Yul is that, yes, Yul is the mob boss. He's the one leading all the votes. But that is not possible if the people he wants to knock out are immune and they're safe. I'm the first domino in the entire chain that enabled the I2 Alliance to function. And I think that would have been a more powerful argument than just saying, dude didn't fish as much as me.
Yeah, I think there's a 1-2 punch there that he could have used, right? And it's the first punch of, I'm the first domino in the chain. Me winning immunity helped Yul navigate those votes. But also, like, hey, I was the first piece of that puzzle, and Yul wouldn't be in that position without the idol that he's had this whole time, right?
Yeah, I don't think he even brings up the idol.
The idol does not come up one time in this final tribal, except for when Becky says that she said no to it. Nobody else talks about it. And if they did, maybe it got trimmed, right? For Ozzy to go along the Yul didn't work hard enough when he's talking to a jury that has Adam and Candace and Nate and Parvati, that's 4 votes of people who did not work at camp. That's 4 people who missed out when they didn't share food, right? Or Nate might have been gone by then, but that's 4 people who didn't get that fish, right, when it was raining, and the I2s and Jonathan cooked the fish and ate it in the rain rather than share it with Candace and the Menage a Blanc. The line he went with just wasn't great given the audience he was speaking to. But who else did you want to cover?
The last one that I wanted to cover was Jonathan. They saved Jonathan as the last jury member to speak, which makes sense. He's one of the narrators of the season. And he brings up a point that we just talked about with Survivor 46. Jonathan is concerned with giving $1 million to a, quote, arrogant 25-year-old kid.
Right.
And this reminded me a lot of the entire Q and Kenzie scenario at the final tribal, where Q votes for Kenzie because he says she needs the money the most. And I was surprised that Jonathan was so focused on factors outside the game at this point in the season, because he's such a game bot leading up to this point. Like, I think he was voting for Yul even if Ozzy was 45 and fully established in his life. Just his play style aligned with Yul more. Do you have any other highlights of jury speeches that you wanted to talk about?
No, not really. I mean, I think Jonathan's was probably very cathartic for Jonathan, right? He does the classic Survivor juror thing, and this goes all over me, and several people did this, so I'm not picking on Jonathan, but just because he was the last one. Candace does it too. Adam does it too. Nate does it too a little bit. Parvati does it too. The whole, I'm going to tear you down and then ask you a question because you're at the end and I'm not, goes all over me because it's an immature thing.
Really?
And
I like it.
well,
I think it adds to the theater of Final Tribal. If it was just a direct question and answer, it wouldn't be that entertaining. But I think it's the personality that's thrown into the questions that makes it fun. Like, Jonathan goes on an entire side tangent about Yul running for office and how he would describe his deceptive gameplay to his future constituents. Like, I think it's all fun.
I mean, see, and that does nothing for me, where I wish that energy from Jonathan could have gone into a better question. These jurors say, you know what? My mind's made up. I know who I'm voting for. I'm just going to use my time on TV to try and tear these people down and make myself feel better about not making it to the end. In a similar vein, but not to the same degree, Sundra's "What did you learn about the world from playing Survivor?" It's a supportive iteration, but it's still not a good jury question. It's a waste of your time on the platform. And this is something that the new era is much better at. They're not giving these players enough opportunity to advocate for themselves. Like, this is the end of the game. Instead of Sundra saying, Ozzy, what did you learn about the world? And him going, love is important, right?
Yeah, I think that's what he said. That's pretty accurate. What he
said. Instead, Sundra, go, hey, Becky, tell us more about why you turned down the idol at Final Four, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Becky, tell us more about when you swayed the vote and it wasn't Yule being the godfather. There are questions that I would have liked to have asked and answered in this final tribal, and instead we get, oh, Yule, you should run for office because you're a great liar. Or Candace's, I'm remembering it now as I've ranted. She does this whole thing where she's like, Yule, you're so political and you love to get around and answer if you don't want to answer the question. So if you say anything but yes or no, I'm not voting for you.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
that's so, we're drifting into reality TV, not competition. And
See,
that's where
I like that.
I know you do. I know you do.
I
and it's where it
appreciate that
goes
the
over
final
me.
tribal gives every jury member the spotlight just for a second, because it gives you a sense of how is this person voting? What's motivating their vote? In the new era seasons, the final tribal is just kind of a crapshoot. There's questions going towards the finalists. There's certain people on the jury that will kind of lead the conversation. I think I remember Franny had a very prominent role in the jury of 44.
Yes.
Yeah. But we don't really get a sense of what does each person on that jury value with their specific vote. And that's really what the game comes down to. So I kind of prefer the old structure compared to the new one. Maybe they could change up the questions themselves, but I like it when each person steps up to the front and they always save the most chaotic person for last. We all knew it was going to be Jonathan on this season.
Oh, yeah.
Are you good to go to the final vote?
Yes, and I tell you what, so my brother walked in and was watching the end with me. He probably watched the last challenge and the final tribal with me. He did not like the walk from Cook Islands to LA.
Oh, come on.
And
It's fun. It's gimmicky.
Dude, I went crazy for it. I missed it so much. Like, it's a gimmick, but it's such a good gimmick. I love that moment.
The walk is great. The actual reading of the votes is great because normally they'll keep the vote tied and then have one person pull away with the majority. But in this case, they let, I think, Yule take a lead on the vote 3-1.
Yes.
Then Ozzy comes back and Yule ties it up. And when it's at 4-4, Jeff takes the last moment of the season to just throw a quick jab at Becky.
It's like running down the aisle of a supermarket on your way to steal a loaf of bread, but as you go, just elbowing an old lady for no reason, right? Like, the crime is done. You just added insult to injury, right? It's so brutal.
Yeah, we know Becky's not winning. The vote's 4-4, and Jeff acts all coy. He opens up the last vote, takes a peek for himself, and says, "This is not for Becky."
He says, if this vote is for Becky, then we have a tie. And then he goes, exactly like you said, he goes, ooh, it's not Becky. And she takes it like a champ. I mean, I always, my heart always goes out to the no vote finalist, right? Because it was the Jakes. It was Jake, right?
Yeah.
The Jakes, the Beckys of the world.
Can you name another no vote finalist that we've covered? Can you name one more?
Heidi?
Heidi was a no vote finalist.
Let's go.
Your final vote here is 5 for Yule, 4 for Ozzy. I can tell you what the actual vote breakdown was.
Please do.
The votes for Ozzy were Parvati, Nate, Jenny, and Rebecca. Yule gets Jonathan, Adam, Candace, Brad, and Sandra. There's something I kept a secret from you that I need to reveal here at the very end, because I thought it was featured in the episode when Jonathan goes home, but it's not included. They bring it up in the reunion.
Okay.
At the final 7, Adam made a deal with Yule where if Yule voted out Jonathan before the other railroads, Adam would guarantee his jury vote for Yule in the end. And that deal between Adam and Yule ends up being what decides the season. Adam has said afterwards that if it were up to him and he didn't make that promise, he likely would have voted for Ozzy.
Whoa.
So, which credit to Yule, right? He was able to make that deal and get the vote through to guarantee that jury vote.
Massive credit to Yule, right? Because, like, Jonathan liked working with him. That's a huge gamble on his part. I wish that had come out in the actual season. See, this is like when we had Todd on and he brought up like how he had discouraged James from idling.
Yeah.
And that never made it in the edit, right? At least it came up in the reunion show, but that's a huge move from Yule. That's pivotal.
Yeah.
So that makes me feel better about being a Yule head. Like, that's a huge strategic move that does not center on Yule's power as the idol holder, right?
Yeah.
That's Yule making a deal and following through on it. So that's great. I love to see that, and that makes me feel better about how high I've been on Yule all this time. So
the only jury votes that really surprised me here were Sundra votes for Yule over Ozzy, when Ozzy was the player that gave her a fighting chance at the Final Four. That one kind of shocked me. I was also surprised by the Jenny vote for Ozzy, where Jenny spent time with Yule on the original Puka tribe.
yeah,
She never met Ozzy. The two of them never interacted, and she votes for him in the end. I want to ask you, were you surprised by the Yule victory, and do you agree with the outcome of the season?
I've been going back and forth on whether or not I agree with the outcome, right? That's one of my favorite questions we have here at the end of each season, because usually I don't. Thanks for that, Maria, on 46. But I do agree with this, right? I wanted Yule to win. My commitment to Yule wavered in the finale with the idol carrying him to the end. Seeing the votes it came down to and knowing what you've just shared about his deal making makes me really happy with the outcome.
I will say from my perspective, if I was on the jury, I would have voted for Yule as well. I just don't value Ozzy's style of gameplay, where his strategy essentially boils down to, I need to win every challenge, otherwise I'm going to get voted out. This is a spoiler that I'll tell you, and it'll come out on our podcast like a week later. But in my player rankings, I don't have Ozzy at number 2. I have Becky ahead of him. I think Becky was more instrumental to the direction of the season than Ozzy.
That's such an egregious take, Clyde.
No,
oh
I
my
fully stand by
God.
it. I think Becky had more say every step of the way, and Ozzy lucks out on challenge wins over and over again. And you can credit him and say he's a great challenge competitor, but I think if you're relying on challenges, then you're doing something wrong, because you're essentially saying, I hope production puts something in front of me that I'm good at, I'll win, otherwise I'm going home. And Ozzy was in a spot multiple points this season where he would have went home if he was vulnerable.
That's a very fair point, but at the same time, I mean, I would feel like that was a less egregious take if Becky had gotten the chance or taken the chance at any point during the final tribal to articulate how she had swayed votes and how she had directed the season. When it was time for closing arguments, she's a lawyer. She did not bring anything like that up, right?
Yeah. No, I completely agree that her biggest flaw is her loyalty to Yule. But I think that if she sits at the end without Yule against Ozzy, I bet she picks up 4 jury votes that like Yule helps direct in her way. So she looks worse than she actually is with that title of 0 vote finalist. With Yule winning the season, I think it's good for Survivor at large, because Yule represents the core of Survivor itself. This is not a physical competition. There's a reason why we don't cast solely, models and athletes and people that do triathlons every year. And that's because there's a social and strategic side to it.
Yeah, thank God we got this totally normal dude in Yule who isn't built like a superhero. Thank goodness we got a nerd who doesn't have a 9-pack, right? Wait, that doesn't make sense. A 10-pack, right?
But you get what I'm saying. Like, if you're a new fan and you've never seen Survivor and you turn on the television, you expect someone in the Ozzy mold to win 90% of the time. And I think Yule really pivots away from that. But what were you saying?
I mean, I was going to say it all comes back to outwit, outplay, outlast. Yule has 2 of the 3, outwit and outlast, I would argue. Or, depending on how you define play, he has outwit and outplay. Ozzy has outlast, right? He won challenges and he survived that way. Yule played the game and he outsmarted people and he made deals. In that sense, he's definitely better for Survivor. And as much as I love a good meat boy, and I love to see Ozzy get to the end, and I love the historic 5 immunity win stretch, and I love that he's fishing and feasting and climbing trees, right?
Oh, he embraces the meat boy persona more than anyone else that we've covered on the podcast.
He does. But as much as I love to watch a meat boy in this game, I wouldn't pick the meat boy to win, right?
Wow.
And maybe that's some growth in me as a Survivor analyst here on the show, but maybe we should make t-shirts that say Survivor analyst on them.
I want to ask you, though, because we've now covered 6 winners on the podcast, 6 seasons in the books. I want to know where Yule ranks for you as a winner. So to catch our listeners up to speed, your previous winner ranking was number 1, Todd Herzog, Survivor China. Number 2, D, Survivor 45. 3, Jam Jam, Survivor 44. 4, Kenzie, Survivor 46. And 5, Natalie, Survivor Samoa. And I have the exact same rankings as you out of those 5. Where are you putting Yule in that mix?
So when Clyde reminded me that I'd have to do this earlier, he literally typed out the rankings for me to remember before I said I don't remember what I had done. So I just wanted to say thank you again for that on the air, because that was very sweet.
I have it in the notes app on my phone, your season rankings and winner rankings.
So I would put Yule, he's top 3. I think Jam Jam's moving down to 4. And the question is Yule 2 or is Yule 3?
Oh, he's not in contention for number 1, you're saying?
No. Todd stays number 1 in my book. It's a question of, does Yule go above or below D? And I think he goes in 3rd. I'm going to go Todd, D, Yule, Jam Jam, Kenzie, and then Natalie.
So we finally differ. I have Yule at 4, below Jam Jam. And this is my chance to give my spiel on Yule, because as a character, I love Yule. I think he's like a genuinely kind and level-headed presence on the show, which was nice amidst this season where there was a lot of chaos. As a player, I think Yule's amazing as well. I think you can throw Yule onto any random season of Survivor, and he'll make the merge. He can make a run in the post-merge with legitimate win equity. In my all-time player rankings, I have Yule at number 11. So I have him as a player ahead of Todd, but I think Todd's winning game is more impressive, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
However,
okay,
Yule the winner is one of the luckiest winners in the history of the show. And
yes.
I think that his reputation oftentimes kind of blows his game out of proportion. You can look at his track record. He had the immunity idol, which was overpowered, gave him a free ride to the final tribal council. There was not a single round in the post-merge where Yule was technically vulnerable. You can credit him in that no one tried to flush the idol, but it's still a big asterisk for me.
Right.
You have the bottle twist, which gave the I2s the opportunity to flip the numbers in their favor at the merge. Without that twist, they go into the merge down in numbers and the Raros hold control. The luckiest thing for Yule is the surprise Final 3. Without that twist, Ozzy probably wins immunity at Final 3, and I don't know what happens, but there's a chance that Yule goes out as the fallen angel of the season. So there's just too many outside factors impacting Yule's game for me to really look at this as a legendary performance. Out of the 46 winners in the history of the show, I have this ranked at number 20. I think there's 19 winning games that are more impressive than this.
That's crazy, but I mean, I'll take your word for it. I think the fact that it is undeniable that there is a huge element of luck in Yule's win. The idol is just overshadowing, and that's a shame, right?
So on the topic of rankings, where does Cook Islands rank for you? So to catch our listeners up to speed, your season rankings were China, Samoa, 46, 45, 44. Where is Cook Islands going for you?
Oh, it's going above all of the new era, right?
Really? You're still down with the new era like that?
The challenges are too good, man. Like,
okay.
Like the challenges, the setting, the premise, like there's zest and flavor to the setting and the season. There's a reason, right? I'm looking at our rankings and it's China, Samoa, and then Survivor 46, Survivor 45, Survivor 44. They're just bland, right? It's like, oh, would you rather go to this burger joint, local place, this barbecue joint, or do you want to go to McDonald's or Wendy's or Burger King, right? Like,
yeah, they're standardized,
mass produced. So I'm going to say there's a special place in my heart for Samoa, and I feel bad doing this, but I'm going to put Cook Islands in the number 2 spot.
Wow. I am very surprised by that.
Where did you think I would put it?
I thought you would put it at 3, because I know how much you love Samoa. There's that element of nostalgia with the first season that we covered. Everything feels new and exciting at that point. So Cook Islands rolling into number 2. For my rankings, I have China at number 1, 46 at number 2, Samoa at number 3, 44, 45, and now the caboose of the season, number 6, Survivor Cook Islands. I think people look back at this season very fondly because of the cast. There's a lot of big names here. You have Parvati, you got Yule, you have Ozzy. But I really feel like the season is carried by a 3 to 4 episode stretch in the middle where for 3 or 4 weeks in a row, you get the mutiny twist, the bottle twist, the Jonathan flip, and the Candace meltdown at Final 8.
Yeah.
Those 4 episodes are elite. But everything surrounding it is pretty dull. Like, the season is 15 episodes long. 10 of them happen in the pre-merge. So the pre-merge for this season really drags out. It's also a 20-person cast where we've complained about it all season. We don't know anything about at least half of these people. And the edit just feels so unbalanced, which on one hand leads to some incredible characters, but it kind of cuts a lot of the drama out of the season when you know that it's going to be either a Yule, a Jonathan, or an Ozzy win at some point. So I'm pretty low on Cook Islands. It's my least favorite that we've covered. And in the history of Survivor, I have it at 39 out of 46. It moved up a little bit. I had it at 40 before. I nudged it up one spot.
39 out of 46 is wild. Yeah. I mean, I'll say this. It gives me a lot of hope going forward.
So we'll see. I feel like we're already starting to differentiate in what we look for in a Survivor season with your preference for the older ones.
I think that's great.
Oh, it's definitely good for the pod. A final question for you to close out the season, unless you have any questions for me at the very end.
I always like hearing your perspective because obviously the all-encompassing knowledge is very important here. But I guess if I could ask one question of you, it would be, if you could change one thing about the format of this season. So you could change the idol, you could change the challenges, you could change the final tribal from 3 to 2, but you can only do one. You can only make one change to the structure of Survivor China. So I'm sorry, Survivor Cook Islands. What would you say is the biggest flaw in this season and that you could change and it would go from 39th out of 46 to somewhere higher?
So the segregated tribal divisions definitely don't help. That'd probably be my top pick. But if we're looking at the game gimmicks, not the the stuff that we hit on in the premiere.
Look, we're not excusing the incredibly the most fraught decision of the season, but considering how it ended up, and we didn't end up with the white tribe sweeping, right? We didn't have the worst case scenario. We're gonna look that aside. We're gonna skip that. What else? What would you change?
It would probably be the idol. I can deal with a long pre-merge. That's something I really considered, like having the merge be a couple episodes earlier. But I think the season really suffers from having one of the most strategically savvy people on the cast holding an item that's basically invincible. This is the worst version of the idol in the entire history of the show. And I think if it was just the modern version of the idol, which actually gets introduced in season 14 right after this, it would have added a lot of drama to the season because Yule would have felt, human in the post-merge.
Yeah.
There were points where he just felt like a superhero, like no one could touch him because of that thing. So that'd be my primary change. My last question for you is returning players. So we have 5 returnees. We talked about them earlier. The 2 that we're adding to the list are Ozzy, who goes back on Survivor Micronesia, season 16. Favorites tribe on that season now includes Amanda, James, Ozzy, Penner, and Parvati. We still got about 5 spots left there.
Wow.
The other returnee is Yule, and this warms my heart. Yule returns on season 40, Survivor Winners at War. 13 years after competing on Cook Islands.
That's awesome.
He takes time in confessional to talk about Penner and Penner's family and raise awareness for ALS. So It's cool seeing Yule go back to the show and compete in a completely different stage of life. By the time he goes back, he has a family, he has kids. So it's still a Yule, but it's even more mature version of Yule.
Yeah.
With that said, do you think that group of 5 are the ideal 5 people? Or do we even need 5
from
returnees?
This cast?
Do we even need 5 returnees from this cast? Is that too many? Who would you want to see come back?
I'm assuming in whatever Parvati comes back and does, she plays better. I touched on this a couple weeks ago. I'm convinced that she has a winning season in her because otherwise, why is she so famous, right? We don't need Candace back.
I agree.
I'd go back and forth on whether or not Ozzy needs to come back.
Really? I feel like Ozzy's potentially the biggest lock on the board from this season.
And I look forward to watching him again, but like Ozzy has the most, and this is a little bit reductive, but it's almost, it's getting late. We've been doing this for a while. Ozzy has one gimmick, and it's be good at the physical game. Ozzy is a meat boy, right? You put Ozzy into another season, he's still going to be a meat boy. That's my expectation. Parvati, she's a flirt. That's a more variable strategy. Penner, strategy, game bot. He will try to adapt to whatever tribe and whatever season he's in. Same with Yule. There's something about Ozzy's gameplay where I'm not convinced that he will shine outside of this situation. I don't know if this performance could translate adequately to another season. But I do want to see him. I'm just not convinced he would thrive coming back.
Okay. Well, I think it's fair to say that there's a difference between people in the game saying Ozzy's been great in challenges so far. He could be a huge threat in the post-merge in the physical side of the game versus we saw Ozzy pull off the best physical game in Survivor history. That's an entirely different reputation going into a random season. I agree with you that Candace did not need to come back. She was not someone I was really campaigning for. I would have liked to see Cowboy come back instead of her. I think Cowboy's a very interesting character. I don't know if he's the most politically correct person that you'd want to see.
Yeah.
But he defines the pre-merge. I think he's one of the main characters for the first 4 episodes. That's everything I got for Survivor Cook Islands. Another season in the books. Next week,
congratulations.
I'll be releasing my player rankings so you can hear my full reasoning on why Ozzy doesn't deserve to be a top 2 contestant on the cast. Any parting words for you, Jack, as we close out this season?
Well, thanks for sticking with us for another retro season. If you're looking to join us for the next live season, 47 starts in just a couple weeks here, right? And so we'll be covering Survivor 47 pretty much live. We'll put out episodes each week after the live episode airs. Hopefully we'll get some fun guests on this year. Follow us at Survivor Analytics. Sometimes there's an underscore, sometimes there's not. I think. I don't know. But thanks for listening, and it's been a pleasure. We'll see you for season 7.